So my dear friend and organizer of this very excellent imaginative idea of Harish Hande told me to speak about my personal failures. The problem is you allotted such a short time that if I have to speak all about my all personal failures, there will not be enough time even for a few days. But it's a very interesting program and a lot of interesting ideas have been generated, and I was very thrilled to listen to my friend when she spoke about how one should not be positive. That's what your message was. So if I talk about failures, of my personal failures, and then we expect people to be more charged, may be difficult. So let me just pick up few of these and also try to do that. So number one, for me, because Harish insisted I must speak about my personal failures. So I don't know, he's my friend or not. So Rohini was trying to put a very good perspective into all this. She gave a very powerful speech, so I was thinking her right place would be in politics, because she was speaking so well. Actually, by training, I am a chartered accountant. I never could imagine that I would ever be in politics. But I was always interested to do something good for the society. So I had a very large practice as a chartered accountant. But if somebody is running an NGO, a not-for-profit organization, I would do everything free. So end of the day, I ended up doing everything free for many people. So from that point of view, successful chartered accountant but a failure in terms of cash flow. So I never thought that I will ever be in politics. But I was involved with a lot of organizations, maybe 150. And because I was doing everything free, I was obviously, if you do something free, you're popular. So people used to call me, invite me. So I became, and also I was relatively young, in my early 20s. So one day, and that's where some connection with Rohini's husband, is that I came across one of my friends who was contesting an election for Saraswat Cooperative Bank. I was 23 or 21, 22. I just passed CA. So I said, he came to me, he was a senior person, said, can you help me talking to people to get me votes? So I talked to people, everybody voted for him. So I said, my God, nobody asked me who is the candidate. When I told them, they gave me a vote. So I said, why not contest myself? So next election I contested, which I lost incidentally. And that's the loss, we talk about failure. But anyway, I then became the youngest ever chairman of that largest cooperative bank. So that of course is the record, probably nobody can, so far not broken, hopefully it's difficult. And I was at all levels of cooperatives. But in a way, that first failure triggered and urged me. Firstly, I thought I will just try because somebody is giving me. I said, how can I fail in the election? It is all possible. So I said, it's not enough efforts. There are more than 200,000, maybe 250,000 shareholders. And no political, nothing. This is all person to person. And I, of course, won and then got into it. And because I got into the cooperatives, I obviously neglected my practice. And then one day I get a call from a political party to contest Lok Sabha election. I was in Indonesia on a professional work and I have contested. And since then I have had 10 cabinet positions. In fact, 2014, I won 4 Lok Sabha elections. 2014 I didn't contest. But then Prime Minister Modi again made me this, as he said, G20, G7, and then of course I was a minister. So I had 6 positions under Vajpayee, 4 under Modi ji. But all this started because of that failure. I said, how can one fail? But now that's a different matter. So that's why I'm saying if I keep talking about my failures, there are many, many more. which will consume all the time that is available, and you are interested on the Rohini's philosophy of being positive. So actually, it's very interesting discussion that is going on since morning. And Rohini made a good point about collective failures. The failures as a society. Failures as a community. If you look at it, and that's what most of the people have talked about, is the overarching theme of not just this conference alone, but our interest, our engagement, the issue about our survival, one of the biggest challenge we are all confronting with, and all that deals with climate change. And if you really look at it, climate change, it's actually a biggest common failure of a society at large. One of my friends, Lord Nicholas Stern, where I also am a visiting professor in London School of Economics, he always says market failure. Because we all believe that markets can correct everything. Markets have the ability to send right signals, and that's why we came out with Kyoto Protocol, 3 market-based instruments. Joint implementation, CDM, emission trading. Because we said market needs signal and market will solve all the problems. I'm not doubting that idea. My friend Karl Pope is here, so he'll have different views on this, which I share. Many of these, we work together. But markets will succeed or failure is a different thing, but the biggest market failure that is ever seen by anybody is the climate change. So if you talk about failure, and that's the right way why you are doing this program on failures and linking it to climate change, because that's the biggest failure of our ability to come out with ideas to prevent it and to correct it. So, and that's why first session was talking about those, one of the very interesting ideas. One thing is, I was just going through the program, and I think we have said the too big to fail idea. And that's again to deal with markets. Because where do you fail? You fail in marketplace. You make a product which doesn't succeed. The pricing is wrong, the marketing is wrong, something is wrong. It's a market failure of that particular product. So you said one of the theme is too big to fail. I think the big problem of this world is that first you allow somebody to become so big and invest all your resources and then make sure it doesn't fail. Suppose if you put those same resources into making that small will survive, forget big to fail. Too big to fail is the correct idea. I mean, we are so intelligent people that every time you want to do something, we'll come out with such a camouflage idea that people say, oh, it's correct, absolutely right. It's too big to fail. But the right question is, why small cannot survive? If small can survive, there is no need to protect our bigger companies or bigger organizations or bigger entities to prevent them from failing. So small don't survive is a bigger problem in the world than too big to fail is a challenge that we have to deal with. But a small has always a problem. Like if you look at the world as a whole, we obviously have more than $100 trillion of GDP output every year. 100 trillion. It's not small. I mean, when we started the century ago, where were we? And we never heard the word trillion also that time, probably in terms of GDPs. And today we have done all that. But just imagine the same world where we talk about these numbers and get very enthralled by this idea that we have done so well. There are probably 80% of the people, 90% of the people in the world have facing a miserable life. Now that miserability is a relative term. Like Carl will tell you in the US, there are enough number of poor people. But the poverty of a person living in America is different than the poverty of people living in Africa. But that doesn't mean there is no poverty in the US. So that means that we have created a world where small have very big challenge to survive. And that's the biggest problem of today's world. And that's the biggest failure collective failure that we have got. So one is climate change failure, on ecological failures, but more important are the social failures. We are not able to make sure that society survives in which every individual will have some reasonable, decent way of living. I remember Mahatma Gandhi used to ask this very pertinent question. Can you ever sleep in peace when you know that your neighbor is gone without food for the whole day and is sleeping hungry? So that's a question if we can ask to ourselves. And then make sure that his social failures can also be prevented. And then if you really look at it, whether climate change or all these issues of greater importance. And then the very important point that was put up in the morning was, let us focus on that person. And that's what you mentioned about people and planet. That was incidentally was the theme of G20 presidency of Italy. People, planet and prosperity. So that was 3 P's they were talking about. My point is, if we really want to survive in future and don't want to fail as a community of nations, we'll have to actually make sure that our entire thinking process, this whole thinking has to change and put it on the people as a focal point. Now, how do you do that is a big issue. When you talk about people, are they same? There's so many people sitting in this room, each one has a different DNA, different priorities, different thinking. So how do you make sure? So that's the biggest challenge that world will face when we see development of people. Planet is easy to understand because that is something which is far more we can comprehend it better. But people, it's not very easy to understand. And every person like US, which largest economy of the world, with per capita income so high, you mean to say that every person in US will be happy? Or for that matter in Scandinavia, where it is also a very high level of incomes. So what is important is, when you talk about people, there are different kinds of people. And for making people happy, that should be the focus of all public policy. If you want to make that, then you have to understand what a person's life ambitions are, life goals are. So there is, even if you make economic development, and there is so much of social inequality that arises out of that. With highest per capita income, there will be probably 5% of the top population will be sharing 80% of that income. So the problem is not economic development alone, but making sure that even others also get that. So how do you get that at the same time? So economic, social, physical, emotional, spiritual, all of that has to happen at the same time. And that's a bigger challenge. And there, whether we like it or not, we have to change our combined thinking to make it completely different than so-called modern paradigms of development. We'll have to redefine what development is all about. And if we don't do that, maybe for some more time we can continue like this. But I don't think there is too much of time for us, because there are so many forces which are trying to pull us down. And one of the big forces is, of course, the ecology. Because you cannot live in just by borrowing more and more from the planet and not survive with that. So I think we have a big challenge, and I think therefore there is only course correction we can do to avoid more failures is, how do you bring this holistic development of a human being as a priority? It is not just one part of development which will be enough, holistic development. Whether you like it or not for that, I'm not talking about religion, we'll have to go on to spiritualism. See whether we, like, how can the human beings have survived on this planet for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years actually. How they survived? Did they go to universities to understand how it works, and then that's how they survived? Did they acquire technical qualifications? Did they do higher education? Did they do technical course in nothing? How did they survive? Because every individual went into his own inner energy, spirit, and understood, how can I deal with a situation like this? Whether it's Ice Age or a Stone Age, he survived because he realized That's the only way I can survive. Because I have got inner knowledge. So that knowledge we are forgetting, and we are trying to collect knowledge from outside. So every person has a different ability to get that inner knowledge. Because every person is so different than one another. And that is how the new development paradigm has to happen to avoid future failures. So individual failures can always happen and not. And there again, it's a very philosophical question. What is meant by failure? If somebody says, I have not made $1 billion, it's a failure. Somebody says, I cannot survive because I don't make even $1 a day. It's not a failure, but it's a survival. So what is a failure? What is a success is all a relative term. And I think if you judge people by only on those parameters which are commonly understood, your focus on people will never succeed in terms of getting them on board, in terms of their satisfying their own life ambition. And therefore, I think this is where is a big challenge. Because how do you go to every person and how to do that? We have more than almost 8 billion people in the world. How can you go to each and every person's individual understanding about 1 billion, 8 billion people and try to tailor-made a program for him? It's not going to be easy. But that's why we have to think about, maybe here technology can play a role in understanding that, and public policy can respond to that. We'll be able to avoid so many of these challenges. But climate change, again, just coming to this last point. Failures. How people live after failures. What they do to adapt to their own lives. A young boy or a girl loses the parents, she still survives. How? Because she adapts to the new reality. A young married woman loses a husband, and in particular in India, in rural India, it's a big challenge, but still she survives. Because she can adapt to situation. Now in this biggest challenge that we are facing, the climate change, the biggest intervention that is needed is adaptation. Like we adapt to our lives, when we lose something, we become a failure in some matter, we adapt to that situation and move forward, move on. I think that is what we need to do in case of climate change also. Let us not talk about mitigation all the time. I mean, mitigation is necessary, no doubt about it. But I think we should mitigate the mitigation debate. And we should go into the adaptation one more. Because if just imagine, number one, this whole thinking is now net zero will solve all the problems. I always feel, thank you. Firstly, net zero is another 20 years, 30, 40 years. So none of the leaders of the world today will be there to look at what is the situation at that particular time. So they have made a right promise. They have created right euphoria, and they will be gone, well, maybe much before that. So they will not be there. In any case, even if you succeed, what about the historical emissions, which are already there in the atmosphere? They will keep continuing the climate change for another several decades more. So that's what I'm saying. I hope that this net zero doesn't result into big zero. What is important, therefore, is to focus on something which is so necessary. That is adaptation. Because if climate change is a certainty, adaptation is a necessity. So why not focus on adaptation? So if the climate change was a failure, market failure, we need to adapt to failure by doing adaptation to climate change. And that is what we really need to do aggressively. So therefore, all these, my friends from philanthropy, all the governments, everybody should focus only on adaptation for time being. Because in long term, everybody is dead anyway. So we have to survive in the short term. And for that to survive in short term, we need adaptation. And therefore, I think this is what we really need to do. Otherwise, this absence of adaptation will be the bigger failure than climate change. It will create more social issues than we are facing today. And in fact, if you really look at it, the industrial evolution, that's what we actually try to find out whether temperatures at that particular time, that's a baseline. Because actually speaking, that was a big human intervention happened. And that's after that, it's all human-induced greenhouse gases which have gone into the atmosphere. That's why we calculate that. What was that? What happened in industrial evolution? Was it not technology? Was it not something that we did We thought we had discovered fossil fuels. What is not technology? So we did that. So I think this is the beginning of a new era in which we'll have to focus on technology for something which is good for common people of the world. And to do that, we'll have to change the thinking to make sure that people-oriented development, which can really happen, but that people-oriented development can happen only when we understand people not as a generic term, understanding people as a person and try to work on that. That's going to be a challenge, and therefore we can use some technological input for doing that. So I think we all already late for the lunch, and therefore I don't want to create a failure in which somebody will go hungry, and therefore I would rather stop here, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
I will tell you why I have a wrong friendship with Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Because once we were in a dinner together in Taj, you won't remember, during the India-US Track 2, just very brief, sir, others will go hungry if we both sit and talk. Sir, you can all leave any time. Huh? So the question is, when he was there, and then it was one of the most boring dinners, and then he had eaten first, and then he texted me and said, Harish, it's very boring, can we leave? So when you think the former Union Minister of India is texting you, so he must have, I mean, there's so much of traffic, I thought there will be a car ready, a police escort and everything else. So I'll reach the hotel faster, that's why I said yes. And then he goes out, and then I follow him, I go out, and then he flags down an auto rickshaw. And we go back in an auto rickshaw. So that is where I'm saying that he's been a politician who has brought in a lot of changes, and that needs to be done. But I think we need more like Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Thank you so much for having this today. But also, just to give you a brief on why we are doing this, again, people, when you're at lunch, be very brutal, extremely brutal on yourself. It's a failures conference. It's about your failure. And what he says, and what Rohini said, and others said, it's collective failure. Let's start with individual, that becomes collective, because we got to be brutal. And I tell you, tomorrow we have a session on Selco, because I have told Selco to have, because I rate Selco in all the 15 years of work, and I rate Selco as 1 out of 100. It has only crossed 1. So I want to ask my colleagues, where did we fail that we are only pointing Selco as 1 out of 100? So we want to say to that, we are nowhere. We are all glorifying ourselves, and thanks to Anshu, we are all the most powerful people, because we can come on this weekend. So if the powerful people cannot sit and do it, so let us become little more brutal. Little more brutal. And I'm saying that today for tomorrow's session, we are scoring only 1 out of 100 in Selco's growth. And with all that right, so we are somewhere going wrong, and we need to rectify. And thanks, Professor Sureshji, that we need to look at adaptation, and we are failing. We are failing. And so what do you say to that?
So Harish, firstly, I mean, I have great admiration, respect and affection towards my dear friend. But just imagine, Harish was an IIT graduate. He employs, the wrong word, he has colleagues of more than 1,000 today in both his organization, maybe more. So he built it up not for his own gain. He could have pursued a career of his own. Why he didn't do that? I mean, I'm just putting up a question for myself. He did that because he answered a question from his own self. Today's biggest failure that we have is that we don't look unto ourselves. We spend most of the time looking at others. Oh, he's a big failure. He's only moving into a car which is only costing 1 crore, 2 crore. That's all. Very big failure. I have got a big car, more. So just imagine, here we are wasting our time actually into looking into something else. So that is what he did not do, and he went into his own self. That's why, whether he's successful or failure, we can all judge and we can say that. But definitely to his own self, he'll say, I have succeeded, because I answered a call from my own self. Now look at it like this. And that's what when I talk about Gandhiji. If we talk about collective consciousness of the society, are we answering our collective consciousness? If somebody is getting salary into billions of dollars a year. And then somebody is getting maybe few dollars per hour, waiting for at tables, moving around, going into some of the supermarkets and try to do that. Is it something whether that person can, so that's what I'm saying. Now if the big person is too big to fail, though we have to protect. And these people who are running around with dollars, just for a few dollars, they are too small to survive. So what is that we have to work for whom? And that's a question that collective consciousness of the people must answer. If you answer it correctly, there won't be any failures.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you told I went to IIT because 300 million Indians did not write it, I got it. If they had written, I would have gotten it. And I'm glad if I had come back from the US now, I would have been in a military aircraft that I would have been brought back. So that I could have at least seen a military aircraft by now. But thank you so much. But please enjoy lunch.